And discerningly, discernment has always been an interesting thing, because the thing that's discerning to me is the mind. And and I don't, when I get the luxury of driving to Prescott and go through the mountains, and usually someone else is driving, so I just close my eyes, and what always comes up is just stop and drop it all. And then it seems that the thing that's saying it's stop and drop it all is the thing that needs to be dropped. So discernment is something that I would like to hear you talk a little bit about more, and the realization of that you're not this and you're not that, and you're not the imagination, you're not the feelings. That's something you said a couple satsangs ago, which really struck me. And I feel like it helps for me to come into this. I don't know, in my mind, there's like just a box that I go to, and then I could just sit there. But I think that the confusing thing about it, of course, is the thing that's looking, talking in your mind is the thing that needs to go. So we use it until we don't. And how do I don't know, something about discernment just keeps coming into my awareness. So I thought I would just ask you about this.
Now, Tracy's asking a question about discernment, but what I think she's asking is about a fundamental paradox at the heart of these teachings, which is that the person, the body-mind entity that is listening to the teaching, that is hearing the teaching with your ears, you've got ears in the body, is the body-mind that hears the teachings. Yeah, ears are a part of the body. The body-mind hears the teachings. If the teachings say, do this, do that, it's the body-mind that hears those teachings, hears the teachings. It's the body-mind that has to understand those teachings, figure out what those verbal teachings mean. And then if the teachings say, go down the road, take the second left, the mind has to figure out, okay, go down the road, take the second left, what does that mean? And then actually do it. So the mind has to hear, understand, and then carry out the teaching, which is analogous to Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, the three stages, the three traditional steps to practice. Shravana means hearing the teaching. Manana means contemplating the teaching, revolving the teaching around and around your mind, asking questions until you understand it. And then Nididhyasana is actually putting the teachings into practice. This leads to liberation. Some say there's a fourth step, which is samadhi, because it leads to samadhi and then liberation. So the fundamental paradox is that the entity that is doing Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, the entity that is hearing the teachings, trying to understand the teachings, asking questions about the teachings, hearing answers about the teachings, then doing the practices, this entity is the obstruction. This is the very entity that is obscuring the self. So how on earth does that work? So that, I believe, is Tracy's question. And so discernment is one of those things that the body-mind may engage with. Like I've said, if you read the text discerningly, you will see that this is what the text is saying in my comments after the first verse of Guru Stuti. So Tracy's saying, okay, if I'm discerning, I'm reading, I'm being discerning, I'm trying to discern what the text means. But isn't this I who is reading and discerning, isn't this the very obstruction? So how does discernment, how does discernment work? If it's good, so good to be discerning, but isn't it the ego mind, the body mind that is being discerning? So this is the paradox of the teaching. It's an inherent paradox at the heart of all these teachings. So before I carry on to attempt to shed light on that paradox, I just want to ask Tracy, was that your question? Have I got that right? Was that your question?
You did discern that correctly. Yes. That's
Did I
you
correctly
pulled it
discern
out of
your question?
my thoughts. Yes, thank you.
See,
Yes.
I used my discernment to understand. See, before you answer a question, it's good to understand the question. I could have answered Tracy's question incredibly well, but if I answered the question that she didn't actually ask, that's not much use. It doesn't matter how good your answer is if you're answering the wrong question. You know, one of my children sat an exam, fairly important exam for at their age. You know, like the school exam, the school test. And one of the things that you always have to teach children when they're doing these tests is to read the goddamn question, answer the question, you know, whether it's an English question or a maths question. You know, if the question says, how long was the brick wall, give your answer in centimeters, and you give the answers in inches or in meters, doesn't matter how good your answer is if it's the wrong answer. If it's the not answering the question, right? That is discernment. Why am I harping on about this? It's the same when it comes to teaching. It's the same when it comes to the teaching. When you're sitting an exam, you have to read the question. Yeah. If the question says write an essay on XYZ, and then you write an essay on something else. You write an essay on ABC, something else. You might have the best essay in the world. It might be the most fantastic essay you've written, but you'll get 0 marks because you haven't read the question. You haven't, or if you've read the question, you've not answered it. Now, if you watch the news, you watch politicians answer questions, you will often find they'll give an answer. But if you're discerning, you're discerning, you'll often notice, hang on a sec, lots of words came out of that person's mouth. And maybe lots of good words came out of that person's mouth. Lots of sensical words that actually made sense came out of that person's mouth, but they didn't actually answer the question. Of course, more often than not, it's nonsensical words that come out. And you think, gosh, that person's been speaking for like 5 minutes. But what have they said? No one don't really know what they've said. Just a bunch of words, a bunch of slogans, you know? Spiritual teachings don't work like this. You can't use rhetoric and cunning to bypass the truth or to get you to truth. If 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 the teaching is do A, B, and C, and you read that teaching, the teaching says do A, do B, do C, whatever it is. And you read it and you can't understand it. You're not able to discern the teaching for whatever reason. Maybe it's your fault, maybe it's the teacher's fault, maybe it's the teaching's fault. Whatever reason it is, if you can't discern the teaching and you follow something else, you do something else, you will not get the result that was intended. So if we have faith in Bhagavan Ramana, you may not. You may not. But let's say you do. If you have faith in Bhagavan Ramana's teachings and he says, do A, B, and C, and you're not able to discern or understand what he's saying, and then you do something else, then you will not go to where he's trying to show you to, you can get to. You will not end up with liberation. You may through other means, through following your intuition if you're lucky. But what happens to most people, this teaching is intuitive, but it's so radical that we often don't follow our intuition. We follow the mind. We're not able to discern the true teaching often. So just as it's important for the child or whoever sits in the test paper to read the question, you have to discern the teaching. That is Shravana, Manana. Shravana means hearing the teaching. Manana means thinking about the teaching, questioning the teaching, until you have a good understanding of what the teaching is actually trying to say. Then you do nididhyasana. Now, when you do nididhyasana, when you practice the teaching, new questions and doubts come up. Yeah. It's like teaching someone to play tennis. You teach them to play tennis. Before they've picked up a racket, you say, this is how you play tennis. They go, okay. You say, any questions? They might ask a few questions. And then they go off and start playing tennis. Once they start playing tennis, they'll have a whole load of new questions based on their experience of actually trying to play. And so you get an iterative process between Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, where more questions arise as you travel down the path. More Nididhyasana you do, more questions arise. You have to ask questions. You have to listen to the answer, understand the answer, put it into practice, and so on. This is discernment. That's the value of it. Many people, this happens to people who come to this meeting as well. I've seen it happen. People come to this meeting and they say, oh, Tom said A, B, and C. And I didn't. I said something else. But they've heard A, B, and C. I said X, Y, Z. They heard A, B, C because they're hearing it through their own filter of their own ideas, their own thoughts. When people read Bhagavan Ramana, they pick out the bits they understand and the bits they're not sure of, you can push that away or something like this. So the true teaching is not discerned. Why do we read teachings from the scriptures from the recommended reading list? It's because then you can see that these teachings aren't just what Tom's coming up with. It's not Tom's teachings. It's also Bhagavan Ramana's teachings. We can read his teachings. You'll see it's the same thing. And it's not just Bhagavan Ramana's teachings, it's Shankara's teachings. And it's not just Shankara's teachings, it's the Upanishadic teachings. And it's not just the Upanishadic Upanishadic teachings. It's the universal teaching in our hearts. You see? It's a true teaching. The teaching has not changed for centuries, for millennia. We can read these teachings going back hundreds and hundreds of years. They're exactly the same teachings. They haven't changed because they work. And it's the direct path. In every age, these teachings get distorted. And in every age, they have to be purified and cleansed of distortion. So we have teachers in every age who clarify the teaching. But the body mind keeps on wanting to distort the teaching. The ego mind keeps on distorting the teaching. It can't hear the teaching properly. So you keep on getting offshoots happening, all distortions of coming. Because fundamentally, this teaching doesn't actually make sense for the mind. It makes sense for the heart. What we truly are, it makes sense to us. Truly, deep down within us, this teaching makes perfect sense, but not logically or to the mind. So the mind will keep on trying to change the teaching to make sense of it. The mind will say things, oh, when the text says something is unreal, it doesn't really mean unreal. What it means is, and then they would distort the meaning of the word unreal. Oh, when the teacher says you have to meditate every day, they don't really mean you have to meditate every day. They mean you can meditate every day, but you don't have to meditate every day. Just by way of example. I'm not saying that is the true teaching, by the way. Just giving you examples of how the teachings are distorted by the mind. So what we have in Bhagavan's teaching is an incredibly pure teaching. He had genuine realization, a genuine full realization. And by the way, genuine realization means full realization. You can't have a half a genuine realization. Genuine means full. Right? He was genuinely, fully realized. And his written teachings have been preserved. We know what they are. He wrote them. We can see the distortions that come in when people record his teachings. But we don't have those distortions in his written works. And you can see that clearly. This is discernment. You have to discern the teaching, either through reading, through listening, through asking questions, or you can do it inwardly. Without any scriptures, these teachings are within us, in our hearts. You can discern this teaching in silence by going within. The best way is to do both. We have both. We have the outer teaching, we have the inner teaching. Most of us will not be able to discern the inner teaching without the help of the outer teaching. Although theoretically it is totally possible. Just like most of us will not be able to discover the laws of physics ourselves without help from scientists, physicists. With their help, we can discover it. Theoretically, there's nothing stopping you from discovering all the laws of physics yourself. Right now, you could figure it all out. The reality is, you're probably not going to be able to do that. Ola's asked the question, is nididhyasana the same as self-inquiry? Yes, it is. Nididhyasana means meditation upon the self. It means discovering what you are. Self-inquiry either refers to nididhyasana alone, or it refers to the Shravana Manana nididhyasana. You'll see different uses. Self-inquiry is a traditional word. Atma vichara is a traditional word. Shankara wrote, the only way to realize the self is through vichara, inquiry, self-inquiry. In Vivekachudamani, one of the earlier verses, he wrote this. And vichara is defined as either nididhyasana or as Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. Either way, so it's semantics. So hearing the teaching, so to do self-inquiry, most people will have to hear the teachings first and understand the teaching. So that's also needed for self-inquiry. Bhagavan Ramana said, he said, the highest teaching is in silence. I've made this point before. He said out loud that the highest teachings are in silence, which itself shows the utility of words. The words can indicate something that's not the words. He said it in words. He said the highest teaching is in silence in words, because the words have value, relatively speaking, but ultimately we let go of the words. Same with these teachings. We are going to address Tracy's point. We are getting there. Tracy's question. So we have to discern the teaching first, just like the exam student has to discern the question. They have to understand the question so they can answer it. You may be a fantastic meditator, but if you're doing the wrong meditation, it won't lead you to liberation. It'll lead you somewhere else. Just like you might write a fantastic essay, but if it's not answering the question, you're not going to pass the exam. So discerning. So once you've discerned the teaching is a remedy to ignorance. Ignorance means delusion or not knowing something, making some kind of mistake, a distortion. It removes the distortion. Now, the body-mind that is hearing the teaching is a part of that distortion. And the teaching itself is a part of the distortion, actually. Now, let's substitute this word distortion and use the word Maya instead, which is the word I usually use. The person listening to the teaching is Maya, illusory. The teaching itself is Maya, illusory. So the illusory person hears the illusory teaching and discerns what the illusory teaching is, and then follows the illusory teaching, which leads to reality. That's the way the teaching works. Now, this is very clearly explained in the scriptures, by the way. The scriptures admit that they themselves are illusory. The scriptures themselves are illusory. And the scriptures say that. Everything's very clearly explained. So, how can this work, though? Well, this is how it works. Let me see if I can explain it. What you are is the self. You're not actually a person. And there are not actually many people or many things. That's all an illusion. There's not actually a teaching, a teacher, or anyone being taught. That's all an illusion. It's a distortion. But through some, let's say, magical force, it appears that, let's say, it appears that I'm a person and I'm ignorant. I'm suffering. Now, I'm not really, but it appears that way. So I think I'm a person. So as that person, I listen to the teaching, I discern the teaching, I follow the teaching, and it takes me within. The false teachings take you without. The true teachings take you within. Within means towards the I. towards the I am, the subject. Without means outside, which means to objects, to thoughts, to feelings, to external objects, the body, the senses, sense objects. That's all outside. That's all non-self. True teaching takes you towards self. Any teaching that takes you towards self is the true teaching. Doesn't matter what words they use. Whichever teaching keeps you away from self, that's the false teaching. It doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean it's terrible. It just means it's not liberating. They're very good teachings that I would categorize as false teachings. They're good, they're helpful for the body mind, which is good, but they're not ultimately helpful. They're still within the illusion, within the dream. So how can it work? Well, the individual that you think you are, if you investigate, you'll discover the self, which underlies what you actually are. Which underlies that which you think you are. So if the illusory person turns inwards, they come to reality. And that's why the teaching can work. Because the illusory individual is in truth the reality, or God, or Bhagwan, the self, Ramana. When you turn inwards, you discover that which you truly are. If you stay focused outwards, then you stay trapped, believing you're a individual person and living in a world of things. Now, there's another text on the recommended reading list called The Most Direct Means to Eternal Bliss. And in that text, Michael Langford, who's the author of that book, explains that most people, when they turn inwards towards the self, they're still actually turning outwards. Yeah. He also says something else similar. He says, most people who realize that words and concepts and ideas are not the way to discover what you truly are, most of those people are still using words and concepts and ideas to try and discover who they truly are. I'll say them both again. I'm paraphrasing a few teachings from The Most Direct Means to Eternal Bliss. He says, to discover the self, you have to go within to the I am. He said, most people who understand this are still not going within. They think they're going within, but they're actually still going towards some object, like a thought thing. And he says, many people have heard the teaching that you cannot come to truth through words, through concepts, through ideas. But most of these people are still trying to get to the truth through words and concepts and ideas, all of which are objects, subtle objects. So if the body mind, which is not actually real, if the body mind understands the teaching and then turns within, it discovers the self. But the it that discovers the self is just the self. The body mind is no longer there. It's just the self that can discover the self. The truth of the individual is actually God. This is the great revelatory teaching in the Upanishads. Tattvamasi means you are that. Means the vast, infinite, all-powerful, all-knowing God, signified by the word that or Brahman. But rather than trying to find God outside somewhere, the Upanishad said, no, you won't find him outside. Even though he's everything, you won't find him outside. You only find him inwards, as the I am. When you go inwards, you discover the truth. And when you discover the truth, this magical power that has created this ignorance or delusion, You realize that that never actually happened. Now, I put this into words like you realize. It implies like the person realizes. It's not like that at all. It's not a conceptual thing. It's just that the illusion is no longer there anymore. It's just all that remains is that which cannot be put into words, that which you truly are. So, hopefully, I've summarized. I know at length, but I've explained the importance of discernment, discerning the true teaching, which is only to go within towards the I am, not towards the body, mind, world, thoughts, feelings, sensations, or any other objective phenomena, but to go back to yourself. Which is why the word self is so often used in these kinds of teachings, because they're trying to get you to go back towards that, to discern what the true teaching is and isn't, and to follow it. And then why it is important for the illusory individual to discern these teachings, so it can then know exactly what to do and what not to do. When it goes into itself, it actually disappears. When the ego mind, when the apparent person goes back into itself, it disappears. And the self is realized. And the person that was listening to the teaching is seen to have never existed at all. But not seen by a person to not to have existed. It's just this is where the words fail. Hopefully I've made the point clear enough. Just to give you another teaching, Bhagavan often said the jiva is Shiva. Jiva means the sense of being an individual body mind entity, being a person, being an ego mind, being a body mind. This is jiva. But when you look at the jiva proper, when you go into the jiva, you discover Shiva. Shiva means God, that, the absolute, the true self, the auspicious one, the holy one. And of course, it rhymes, which is really important. So jiva is Shiva. When you investigate who am I, you don't investigate the body or the mind. You investigate your own sense of I, which is prior to or beneath the body mind, transcendent to the body mind, behind the body mind. Your own sense of I, because you are that which is aware. You think of yourself as being that which is aware of body mind. But what is that? You sink back into that lovingly, effortlessly, happily, with devotion, with faith. You dissolve into that silence, into that nothingness, and you discover not nothingness, discover fullness of yourself, unconditional love, pure positivity, pure peace, eternal joy, heaven. Jiva is truly Shiva. It only works because you are that. If you are not actually God, then when you go back to yourself, you just find your own little self. But because you're actually God, when you go back to yourself, you discover God. But you don't discover God, you just are what you are. There's no actual discovery. Does that answer the question, Tracy?
It did indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.